The lightning cracked like a whip across the sky, and the neon sign above the diner flickered, once, twice, died completely. 3:22 in the morning. The checkered floor, black and white squares stretching toward a kitchen that smelled of burnt grease and stale coffee, lay empty except for the man in the back booth and the waitress who should have clocked out 6 hours ago. Salvatore Marino sat motionless, his suit, charcoal gray, tailored in Milan, worth more than most people's cars, perfectly pressed despite the humidity that had turned the city into a sauna. His salt and pepper hair was swept back from a face carved by decades of power and the weight of secrets. A thin scar ran from the outside of his left eye to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a betrayal he had never forgiven. His hands rested on the table, gold watch catching what little light remained, fingers arranged with the precision of a man who controlled everything around him. He was waiting out the storm. Waiting, it seemed, for something he could not name. The bathroom door opened. Allara Bennett stumbled into the dining room, and the world held its breath. Her left eye was swollen shut, the eyelid the color of eggplant, a color that meant impact, that meant force, that meant a hand had connected with enough violence to change the shape of her face. Her mouth was bleeding. Copper taste coated her tongue. Dark purple handprints, 5 fingers on each side, mapped her throat in a pattern that told a story about control and helplessness and the exact moment she had stopped fighting back because fighting back only made it worse. The crumpled foreclosure notice fell from her jacket pocket. It scattered across the black and white tiles and came to rest near the chrome leg of the counter stool. She did not see the paper fall. Her vision had narrowed to a single tunnel. All she could think about was Emma. 7 years old. Sleeping in a cot in the women's shelter 2 blocks away, the only home the girl had known in 18 months, and now that home was being taken away. 10 days. That is what the letter had said. 10 days to come up with $150,000, or the custody battle was over. Emma would go back into the system. Back into the machinery that chewed up children and spat them out broken. She had $2 in her pocket. She had counted it 3 times to make sure she had not made a mistake. $2. No mistake. Salvatore Marino lifted his eyes from his untouched coffee and looked at her. Really looked at her. In that moment, she was not invisible. She was not the woman people looked through, the waitress they did not see, the homeless woman sleeping in shelters they crossed the street to avoid. She was seen. Fully. Completely. His dark eyes, grey like storm clouds, like something dangerous and contained, took in the bruises, the blood, the broken thing standing in the middle of an empty diner. He did not move. The diner door exploded inward. The summer rain had not yet fallen, but the wind had arrived first, screaming down the Brooklyn street like an animal clawing at the windows. A figure in a dark rain jacket stood in the frame of the broken door. Douglas Hale. 38 years old, former boxer, current monster. His face was flushed with rage and whiskey. His right hand held a gun, small and black and absolute. He saw Allara, and something in his expression shifted from fury to satisfaction. He had found her. After 3 months of looking, after bribing cops who were supposed to protect her restraining order, after tracking her from shelter to shelter like a hunter following a wounded animal, he had found her in a diner at 3 in the morning. "You think you can run from me?" His voice was broken glass wrapped in venom. "You think you can take my daughter and hide in places like this?" He raised the gun. Allara did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She threw herself in front of the stranger in the booth, the man whose name she did not know, whose face she would not remember clearly in the days that followed, the man who was sitting alone and waiting out the lightning. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her bleeding face against his suit jacket, and when the first shot fired, glass exploded everywhere. The diner window shattered into diamonds. The second shot came almost instantly. The sound of it deafened her. She pressed harder against the man, shielding him with her body because it was all she had, because some instinct older than survival told her that this man could not be hurt, that something in the universe required him to remain standing. The gun clicked. Empty. Or jammed. Or Douglas had only brought 2 bullets because he had expected this to be simple. A diner. A woman. A child he wanted to reclaim. He ran. Backward through the door, into the wind, into the darkness of the Brooklyn street. His footsteps faded. The rain began. Real rain this time, cold and furious. Salvatore Marino's heart was beating so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. In 15 years, no one had ever protected him. In 37 years, no one had ever chosen him. And now a woman, a bleeding woman, a broken woman with bruises on her throat and blood in her teeth, had placed herself between him and death. She pulled away, her hands shaking. "I am sorry. I should not have." Her voice was barely a whisper, shattered like glass. "Do not apologize," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Never apologize for saving a life." She picked up the foreclosure notice from the floor. Her hands were still trembling. She folded it once, twice, and tucked it back into her pocket like it was something precious, something that could still be salvaged. She did not know who he was. She did not know that the man sitting across from her controlled 3 boroughs, that his word could end careers or lives, that his name was whispered in police precincts and federal buildings and in the homes of people who had done things they wanted to forget. She did not know that 15 years of loyalty from men like Sergio and Nino, his lieutenants, his brothers in everything but blood, had never come close to this. To being valued. To being seen as human. And she did not know that somewhere in the rain, a small figure in a soaked coat was running toward the diner door. A 7-year-old girl named Emma, following the woman who had protected her, who had held her when the nightmares came, who had promised her that some people stayed when other people left. She did not know that when that door opened, Salvatore Marino would look at Emma's face and see the features of his own sister, the sister who had betrayed him, stolen from him, disappeared into the foster system with a child who was his blood. She did not know that one act of instinct in a diner at 3:22 in the morning would unravel a conspiracy that had been buried for 5 years. She did not know any of this. She only knew that she had $2, 10 days, and now a stranger who was looking at her like she was the most important person in a room that contained all of Brooklyn. The wind howled. The rain came down like bullets against the broken window. Before we continue, if this story is hitting you, drop a like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The turn of this story is coming, and you will not want to miss it. Now let us go back. Let us understand how Allara Bennett became a woman with $2 in her pocket and a bleeding face in a diner at 3 in the morning. 16 hours earlier, the sun had not yet fallen. The sky was still holding onto its light, though the clouds were gathering in that peculiar shade of grey that comes before a storm. Allara Bennett was not thinking about the gathering storm. She was thinking about the $45 in her pocket and whether she could make it stretch to cover 2 more meals before the week ended. She had woken at 5 in the morning in her car, a 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the back door and a crack in the windshield shaped like a lightning bolt. The car was parked behind a gas station on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, wedged between a dumpster and a chain-link fence. She had learned long ago that parking in plain sight meant questions from police. This spot, behind the station, hidden from the main road, was where nobody thought to look. Her backpack was pressed against the car door, containing everything she owned that mattered. A change of clothes. 2 photographs in a plastic sleeve. A hairbrush. A notebook filled with handwritten notes about Emma's favorite foods, the things that made her laugh, the way she whimpered during nightmares. Allara had kept this notebook for 18 months, documenting her daughter the way other people document their lives on social media. This notebook was her proof. This notebook was her case. She had pushed the car door open carefully, trying not to make noise. The morning was cold. October in New York is a cold that settles in your bones and doesn't leave. She walked into the gas station bathroom, where the fluorescent lights hummed like an insect trapped in a light bulb. The mirror showed her a reflection she had learned not to study too closely. 29 years old, but the tiredness made her look older. Brown hair pulled back with an elastic band that had lost its grip. Eyes the color of wet soil. She ran water over her face and used her fingers as a toothbrush because she had lost her last one 2 months ago. The soap dispenser was empty, had been empty for weeks, so she used hand sanitizer instead. It burned. Everything burned lately. Rosa's cafe opened at 6:30. Allara was there at 6:25 because being early meant she seemed reliable, and seeming reliable meant the manager kept scheduling her shifts. Rosa herself had stopped coming in years ago. The cafe was run by a man named Victor who wore a wedding ring and looked at Allara the way a hunter looks at prey that doesn't know it's being hunted. She had learned to ignore his comments about her body. She had learned to smile when his hands lingered too long on her shoulder. She had learned that survival required a woman to absorb these small humiliations and keep moving forward. The morning shift lasted until noon. Allara poured coffee, steamed milk, wiped down counters, and did not eat because eating meant money that wasn't being saved for Emma. Her hand shook slightly as she worked. Low blood sugar. Fatigue. Fear. The shaking made her spill a cappuccino on a customer's laptop, and the customer screamed at her, and Victor paid him $50 out of her wages to keep him quiet. So instead of earning $43 that day, she earned -$7. She owed the cafe money. But she had not had the negative money yet, so she asked Victor for her pay in cash anyway. He gave her $43 and told her that the $50 would come out next week. She nodded. She took the bills. She walked out into the afternoon light. $43 plus $2 she had found on the street last week. $45 total. The Brooklyn shelter where Emma lived was 10 blocks away. Allara walked because the bus cost $3 and $3 meant she couldn't eat dinner. The walk took 30 minutes. By the time she arrived, the sweat on her skin had turned cold from the October wind, and her stomach was making sounds that embarrassed her, so she tried to breathe more quietly than normal, as if that could hide the fact that her body was running on fumes. Emma was in the playroom on the second floor. The shelter's playroom was painted a color that was meant to be cheerful, yellow, like sunshine, but the paint had faded and stained in the corners, making it look more like the color of an old bruise. Emma sat at a table with a handful of crayons and a piece of paper. She was 7 years old, with brown curls and a gap-toothed smile that she had learned to deploy strategically. She had learned, very young, that smiling could mean the difference between being noticed and being invisible. She was drawing. "Mommy," she said when she saw Allara. This was what she had started calling her 2 months ago, without being asked to, without any official permission. Just one day she had woken up and decided that Allara was her person, and therefore Allara was her mommy. The shelter's director had told her to correct Emma, to explain that Allara was not her mommy, she was her advocate. But Allara had not corrected her. Every time Emma said the word, something in Alara's chest cracked open. Emma held up the drawing. 2 stick figures standing in front of a house with a yellow door and windows like eyes. One figure was tall, one was small. A tiny sun in the corner. Flowers that looked like scribbles. "That's you and me," Emma said. "When we get our real home." Allara sat down in the chair beside her. The chair was small, meant for a child's body, and her knees came up almost to her chest. She took Emma's drawing carefully, as if it was made of something that could shatter. "This is beautiful," Allara said. Her voice was barely steady. "Tell me about the yellow door." "It's yellow because yellow is happy," Emma said matter-of-factly. "And we are going to be happy in our house." The certainty in her daughter's voice was a knife. A perfectly sharp knife cutting through Allara's chest. They sat together for 40 minutes, doing puzzles, reading a book about a mouse who wanted a cookie, playing a hand-clapping game. Emma's hands were small and warm. She smelled like the shelter's laundry detergent and the lunch she had eaten and something else underneath that, something like hope. Children still had hope. They didn't know how to stop having it yet. At 3 o'clock, Ms. Chen found her in the hallway. The shelter's court-appointed lawyer was a thin woman in her 50s with grey streaking her black hair and the exhausted expression of someone who had spent decades fighting a losing battle. She carried a folder. "Allara," Ms. Chen said. "Can we talk?" They stood in the hallway outside the playroom. Through the doorway, Allara could hear Emma singing to herself, making up lyrics that rhymed with nothing. Ms. Chen opened the folder and showed her the paper. The foreclosure notice. The building where Allara had been approved for housing 6 months ago had been sold. The new owner had a policy. No vouchers, no exceptions. The new owner wanted market-rate tenants, people with 401 Burmese kyats and credit scores, people who could afford to stay. The judge's deadline is 10 days from today, Ms. Chen said. Her voice was kind, which somehow made it worse. If you can't secure alternative housing with a proof of funds letter showing $150,000 or more, the judge will rule you unable to provide stable housing for a minor. Emma will be placed back into the system. Indefinitely. $150,000. Allara's hands felt numb. The number was so large that it stopped meaning anything. It was like being told she needed to collect a cloud or measure the ocean. What if I can find something cheaper? Allara asked. With proof of funds for what amount? I don't know. 50,000. Ms. Chen looked at her with infinite sadness. The judge has seen enough cases. He's looking for someone who can prove they're not a flight risk. Someone with resources. 50,000 tells him you could disappear tomorrow. 150,000 tells him you're stable. Those are his numbers, not mine. Allara nodded. She nodded because her mouth didn't work anymore. She nodded because if she started speaking, she would start screaming, and screaming would scare Emma, and Emma was already scared of so many things. There are other options, Ms. Chen said quietly. You could step aside voluntarily. Another family, a real family with 2 parents and a home, they could. No, Allara said. It came out like a weapon. No. Emma is my daughter. She's not legally. She is my daughter, Allara repeated, and her voice did not shake this time. It sounded like a blade. Ms. Chen closed the folder. Then you have 10 days. Evening came early in October. The sun was falling toward the horizon by the time Allara walked Emma back to the shelter. They stopped at a playground that Emma loved, a small pocket of greenery squeezed between 2 apartment buildings. Emma ran to the swings. Allara pushed her, her hands on the small back, feeling the weight of her daughter, trying to memorize this. How it felt. How Emma laughed when she swung higher. How safe she felt, for a moment, in the arc of the swing. That's when Allara saw him. Across the street, standing beneath a bare oak tree, was Douglas Hale. Her ex-boyfriend. The man she had spent 2 years loving and 1 year leaving. 2 years of thinking she could change him, 1 year of understanding that she couldn't. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that made people trust him before they should. Brown hair. Eyes like chips of ice. A charming smile that had convinced her, more than once, that the bruises didn't mean what she knew they meant. He was watching. What's wrong? Emma asked. She had jumped off the swing and was standing beside Allara now, small and uncertain. Children could feel when the air changed. They could sense danger like animals sense a coming storm. Nothing, Allara said. Nothing is wrong. But Douglas was still standing there. He raised one hand, a wave. Not friendly. A promise. That night, at 8 o'clock, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But Emma was at the shelter, safe in her bed, and Allara was sitting in her car outside a 24-hour laundromat, and she needed to know. Ms. Bennett, the voice said. It was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. This is Cordelia Blackwood from the Foster Care Review Board. I hope I'm not calling too late. Allara said nothing. I've been reviewing your file, dear. And I have to say, your case is quite unusual. A woman of your circumstances, no permanent address, limited employment history, sleeping in vehicles, you understand how this presents to the judge, don't you? I work, Allara said carefully. I'm trying. Trying, Cordelia repeated, and there was something like amusement in her voice. Yes, well, trying is admirable. But Emma deserves more than admiration. She deserves stability. A home. Parents with resources. Surely you can see that providing something and wanting something are two very different things. I am her stability, Allara said. I'm the only one who's fought for her. Fighting and providing are different things, Cordelia said. I've seen women like you before, dear. Women who mean well but don't understand that good intentions don't feed children. They don't keep roofs over their heads. Emma would be so much better off with a family that actually has something to offer. Perhaps you should consider what's best for the child and step aside gracefully. See you at the hearing. The line went dead. Allara sat in her car in the laundromat parking lot, watching a man fold sheets through the window, watching his hands work mechanically, watching him fold and fold and fold. 10 days. $150,000 she did not have. A man who had promised to find her and keep finding her. A system designed by women like Cordelia, designed to break women like her, designed to take Emma away and scatter her back into the foster system where children like her disappeared into foster care with no one to fight for them, no one to remember their names. She had $2 left after today. $2, and she had paid for her laundry already, so she was down to zero. The rain started at 11 o'clock, just as she was driving toward Rosa's Diner on 3rd Avenue. A summer storm in October, the kind that comes early and fast and doesn't care about seasons. The rain came down like bullets against her windshield, and the wipers could barely keep up. 3 other cars were in the parking lot. The diner's neon sign hummed through the darkness, a beacon of warmth in the storm. She had no money for coffee. But she had a jacket with holes in it, and it was pouring rain, and inside that diner was light and heat and the possibility of being somewhere that wasn't her car. She parked and walked through the downpour, her clothes soaked through within seconds, water running into her eyes, her hair plastered against her face. The diner door opened into warmth. She wiped the rain from her face and looked around. Mostly empty. A man at the counter reading a newspaper. 2 teenagers in a booth. An old couple in another booth, sitting in comfortable silence. And in the back, in a booth against the window, there was a man sitting alone. Even in the dim light, she could see that he was different from everyone else in the diner. The suit he wore was black, perfectly tailored, the kind of suit that cost more than her car. His watch caught the light, gold, expensive, heavy on his wrist like a promise. He had dark hair, silvered slightly at the temples, and the kind of stillness that comes from being accustomed to power. A faint scar ran along his left cheekbone, from his eye to his jaw, as if someone had once tried to cut his face open. He was waiting out the lightning, she realized. Just sitting. Just existing in the warmth. She took a booth as far from him as possible and ordered water. Outside, the rain turned to violence. The checkered floor of the Metro diner stretched out in black and white squares beneath the fluorescent lights, humming with that particular brightness that only diners possess at 3 in the morning. The smell of old coffee and fried eggs hung in the air like a permanent resident, refusing to leave no matter how many times Deb wiped down the counter. Outside, the rain had turned violent. Lightning split the sky into pieces, and each thunder roll shook the windows in their frames. Allara Bennett sat in a booth near the front, her hands wrapped around a cup of water she had filled herself from the bathroom tap. $2 sat in her jacket pocket, crumpled bills that represented everything she owned in the world. 10 days remained before the custody hearing. 10 days to produce $150,000 in proof of housing funds, or Emma would disappear back into the system that had already chewed her up and spat her out 7 times over. She had been staring at the same spot on the table for 45 minutes when she heard the door open. The rain came in first, driven sideways by the wind. Then came Douglas Hale, soaking wet, eye scanning the diner like a predator checking a watering hole for prey. When his gaze locked onto Allara's face, something cold and sharp twisted in her chest. He smiled. She stood immediately, backing toward the rear of the diner. The bathroom was 6 steps away. Deb didn't look up from the register. Douglas followed. The bathroom was small, lit by a single flickering bulb that cast everything in sickly yellow. 2 stalls. A sink with a mirror that had seen better decades. Industrial cleaner masked the scent of mold underneath. Allara's back hit the sink, her hands bracing against the cold porcelain. Douglas closed the door and locked it in one smooth motion. 3 restraining orders, he said, his voice soft, conversational even, the way people talk about the weather. You think paper stops me, Allara? You think words on a page mean anything when you're mine? She opened her mouth. His hand came up and closed around her throat before sound could escape. The back of her head slammed against the mirror above the sink. It cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading outward from the point of impact. Stars exploded in her vision. Pain sang through her skull like a bell struck hard. You embarrass me, he hissed, his face close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. Made me look weak in front of my friends. Called the cops. You want to know how humiliating that is? Having the woman you own call the police like you're some common criminal. His fist connected with her left eye. The impact was so sudden, so complete, that her vision went white for a moment, not from light but from pain so intense it eclipsed everything else. She tasted blood, warm and metallic on her tongue. He hit her again, this time in the ribs. And again. Her throat. Her shoulder. Each blow was deliberate, calculated to leave marks that would be visible but not so severe as to land him in the emergency room with questions. He had learned the geometry of violence perfectly over the years they had been together. When he finally released her, Allara collapsed against the sink, gasping for breath through a throat that felt like it had been crushed. Her left eye was already swelling, the lid dropping like a heavy door. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Douglas reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled, folded, worn. He shoved it into the pocket of her jacket with deliberate cruelty. The custody hearing. I know about it, he said quietly. I know about the $150,000. I know about the little girl. And I want you to think about something while you're sitting in that courtroom with your swollen face and your bruises. You're going to lose her anyway. The system doesn't reward people like you, Allara. Homeless. Unstable. Damaged. Save yourself the trouble and hand her over now. It's what's best for her. He left. The door clicked shut behind him with the gentleness of someone closing a book. For a long moment, Allara couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't do anything except lean against the sink and taste her own blood and wonder how much more of this she could survive. The fluorescent light continued its sickly humming above her head. When she finally stumbled back into the dining room, her vision was blurred, her throat screaming, her entire body moving like it belonged to someone else. The checkered floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Deb gasped from behind the counter, reaching for the phone to call an ambulance, but Allara shook her head. No, she said, voice barely a whisper. No police. Please. Because Douglas had cops in his pocket. She had learned that lesson the hard way, after the 3rd restraining order had been filed and the 2nd officer had told her, with a shrug, with a smile, that there was nothing they could really do without witnesses, and probably she had provoked him anyway. That was when she noticed the man in the back booth. He had been sitting alone, waiting out the lightning as travelers do on nights when the sky turns violent. Black suit, perfectly tailored. Gold watch that caught the dim light like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Dark hair silvered at the temples. A scar running along his left cheekbone from eye to jaw, as if someone had once tried to carve a message into his face and only halfway succeeded. He was watching her with eyes that had seen too much of the world to be surprised by anything anymore. And yet his expression had changed. Something in the way he was looking at her suggested that the small event of a woman bleeding in a diner at 3 in the morning meant more to him than it should. Allara turned away from his gaze and moved to a booth, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the vinyl and chrome the way she had been disappearing for months. The rain continued outside, violent against the windows. Thunder rolled across the city. And Salvatore Marino rose from his booth, moving with the deliberate grace of a man accustomed to power, and walked toward her. "Sit," he said quietly. It was not phrased as a request. Allara's entire body went rigid, but something in his tone, not threatening, but absolute, made her lower herself into the nearest booth. He settled across from her, his movements controlled and precise. Up close, the scar was even more pronounced, the kind of scar that suggested a very sharp blade and very poor luck or very dangerous enemies. Deb appeared with a towel wrapped around ice. She placed it gently against Allara's swollen eye without asking questions. Small-town diner workers knew better than to ask questions about bruises at 3 in the morning. "Who did this?" Salvatore said. Not a question. A statement of fact that required completion. Allara shook her head. She couldn't speak through the pain that radiated from her eye socket to her jaw to her throat. The diner door slammed open. Wind and rain poured in, and with it came a child, 7 years old, brown curls plastered to her face, clothes soaked through, eyes wild with a fear that transcended the storm outside. "Emma." She ran across the checkered floor, her small feet slapping against the tiles, and threw her arms around Allara with the kind of desperation that comes from thinking you have lost someone you love. "Allara," she cried, her voice small and shattered. "I woke up and you were gone and I didn't know where you were and it was raining and I was scared." Allara held her, despite the pain, despite everything. "It's okay, baby. I'm okay. How did you find me?" "I followed your car. I know the diner. You go sometimes when you need to think." Behind them, Salvatore Marino had gone absolutely still. His face had drained of all color. His hands, which had been steady as stone across the table, had begun to tremble. He was staring at Emma with an intensity that seemed to burn. The shape of her eyes. The exact curve of her chin. The small birthmark on her left wrist, visible now as she clung to Allara for safety, his mother's eyes, his own chin, his own birthmark in exactly the same place. Emma. His daughter. Missing for 5 years. Taken by his estranged sister Lucia during a family war, hidden in the foster system under a false name, lost in the maze of bureaucratic chaos and file transfers. He had spent $2 million searching for her. Private investigators. Corrupt officials. Dead ends that led nowhere. And here she was, soaking wet and terrified, clinging to a bleeding homeless woman in a diner at 3:22 in the morning. His vision swam. The most feared man in New York could barely breathe. Emma didn't recognize him. She had been 2 years old when she disappeared, and a 2-year-old's memories dissolve like rain on pavement. But he would have known her anywhere. He would know her in the dark. He would know her across a crowded room. He would know her at the end of the world. Allara held the child, whispering reassurances, running her unblemished hand through the soaked curls. A woman so broken by the system that she wouldn't even call for help, protecting a child that wasn't biologically hers. A child she was fighting to keep, counting pennies, working 3 jobs, sleeping in a car, refusing to give up even when mathematics suggested the universe was against her. Salvatore watched this. Processed it. Made a decision that would echo through the rest of his life. "The man who did this," he said quietly, his voice steady again, controlled. "Where is he?" Allara met his eyes with her one good eye. The other was swelling shut now, the lid heavy. "It doesn't matter," she said. "He has friends in the precinct. Connections. Restraining orders don't work when the police don't enforce them." Salvatore's jaw tightened. A muscle flickered beneath his skin. "What is his name?" he said. Allara hesitated. But something about this man, the absolute certainty in his voice, the way he had moved toward her without question, the fact that he had not called the police, suggested that names meant things to him in a way they meant things to almost no one else. "Douglas Hale," she whispered. Salvatore took out his phone and sent a single text message. No words, just a name and a photograph. Within seconds, his phone buzzed with a response, a location, a confirmation, a beginning. Outside, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 men emerged into the rain, Sergio and Nino, lieutenants in an empire that stretched across New York like a web of silk and steel. Both mid-30s. Both dressed in dark suits that looked like uniforms. Both moving with the predatory grace of men who had done difficult things and would do them again without hesitation. They entered the diner. They saw Emma. They saw their boss's face. In 15 years of working for Salvatore Marino, Sergio had never seen him look like this. Unguarded. Shaken. Almost human. "Wait outside," Salvatore said, without taking his eyes from Emma's face. Sergio and Nina withdrew into the rain, but in the back of Sergio's mind, a single thought bloomed: something had changed tonight. Something fundamental. The world they had known was not the same world they would wake up to tomorrow. Salvatore stayed seated across from Allara. The diner hummed with fluorescent light. The rain battered the windows. Emma had grown quiet, exhausted, her small head resting against Allara's shoulder. "Tell me," Salvatore said gently. "Tell me everything." So she did. The morning light cut through the hotel room like a blade. Allara sat on the edge of the bed at 2:13 a.m., unable to sleep, unable to move. The sheets beneath her were Egyptian cotton. Clean. Expensive. Everything in this room cost more than she had earned in 6 months. The bruises on her throat had turned purple and yellow, mapping the shape of Douglas Hale's hands across her skin. Her eye had swelled to a slit. When she looked in the mirror, she did not recognize herself. Emma slept 3 feet away, her small body curled beneath blankets that had never known a washing machine in a laundromat. The child's chest rose and fell in the darkness. She had not spoken since the diner. Not one word in 3 days. Just silence and occasional whimpers that tore through Allara's chest like broken glass. Allara's hand trembled as she opened the envelope on the nightstand. $150,000. A letter. No signature. But she knew. The money had appeared in her lawyer's office yesterday morning, delivered by a man in a black suit who said nothing except, "This is for the hearing." Her lawyer had wept. "Allara, do you understand what this means? You can fight now. You can actually fight." But Allara did not feel relief. She felt terrified. What if it came with a price she could not pay? What if this was a trap, a way to bind her to a man she did not know, a stranger whose world operated on rules she did not understand? Salvatore Marino. Even his name sounded dangerous. She had searched for him on her phone, found photographs of men in expensive suits, mentions of federal investigations that never went anywhere, whispers about empire and ruthlessness. Why would such a man help her? What did he want in return? She walked to the window. 11 floors down, the street was empty. Rain drummed against the glass. The city never truly slept, but this hour belonged to the desperate and the broken. People who worked graveyard shifts. People who could not afford sleep. People like she used to be, before that diner, before the lightning, before everything fractured and reformed into something she could not yet understand. The thought came quietly at first, then grew louder. She could leave. Right now. Pack Emma's things into the single duffel bag they owned and disappear into the Greyhound station. Boston. Chicago. Somewhere new. Start over again under a different name. It would not be the first time. She had done it twice before, fled cities, changed identities, rebuilt lives that collapsed within months because the world was designed to break people like her. But she was so tired of running. Her hand touched the cold window. Her reflection stared back, a ghost wearing bruises. This woman in the glass had shielded a stranger. She had stood between a Mafia boss and bullets she could not see, motivated by nothing except the absolute certainty that some people mattered more than breathing. What had that act cost her? Everything. What had it gained her? A chance. A single chance that had arrived in the form of a man with storm grey eyes and a voice like thunder. Emma murmured in her sleep. Not a word, exactly. A sound. The smallest complaint against the darkness. "Don't go," the child whispered, still dreaming. Allara stepped back from the window. She turned from the empty street. She looked at Emma's small form beneath the blankets, this child who had been born into nothing, who had known only shelters and transitions and the constant hunger of poverty. Emma had lost her mother. She had lost her home. She had survived long enough to matter to Allara, and Allara would not let her lose this too. She would not run. For the first time in her adult life, Allara Bennett chose to stay. At 5:27 a.m., the rain had not stopped. Federal agents in tactical gear surrounded a building in Queens. 12 men in black, moving like ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness. Their boots made no sound on the wet pavement. Their weapons were drawn but not visible, concealed beneath tailored jackets that matched the city's skin. Agent Moss stood at the head of the team. 48 years old. Iron grey hair. A scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone, a souvenir from 3 years spent trying to dismantle the corruption ring that Douglas Hale had built brick by brick with the help of cops who had traded their badges for cash. The warrant in his hand had taken 18 months to secure. Evidence, documents, testimony from victims whose names had been buried in files marked as closed investigations. But last night, new recordings had arrived at the FBI field office. Dates. Names. Transactions. Everything they needed. Everything that had come from a single text message to a man named Salvatore Marino, who had decided that Allara Bennett mattered enough to move. Moss keyed his radio. For other teams were in position across the city. For other apartments. For other corrupt police officers, all waiting to be arrested simultaneously. Go, Moss said. The door splintered under a battering ram. Douglas Hale woke to boots on his bedroom floor. His body jerked upright, hands coming up defensively, eyes wild. The apartment filled with shouted commands, with the sound of drawers being pulled open, with the physical reality of his world collapsing in the space between sleep and consciousness. Douglas Hale, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Moss said, holding the warrant where Douglas could see it. The document fluttered in his hands like a death sentence. You're under arrest for racketeering, witness intimidation, assault, and corruption of public officials. Douglas's mouth opened. His legs would not support him. He collapsed to his knees on the cold floor, trembling like a caged animal released only to find itself surrounded by hunters. No. No, I know people. I know the commissioner. I have immunity. I have? You have nothing, Moss said. His voice was deep and steady, like a judge pronouncing sentence. Every cop you know is in handcuffs right now. Every protection you thought you had is gone. By 6:15 a.m., Douglas was in the back of a federal vehicle. His wrists were cuffed. His face had gone gray. Through the window, cameras flashed, news crews had been tipped off, positioned and waiting. The golden morning light caught his expression as he was pushed into the SUV, pure terror, the look of a man who had finally understood that there were predators larger than himself. Every news channel in New York carried the footage by 7 a.m. By noon, a preliminary assessment from federal prosecutors, 40-year sentence expected. Minimum. No bail. No deals. Just a cage and decades of powerlessness. At 2:14 p.m., Cordelia Blackwood stood in a ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, champagne flute in her manicured hand. She was giving a speech about child welfare. The irony was exquisite and terrible. 200 wealthy donors sat at tables covered in white linens, eating filet mignon, listening to Cordelia Blackwood, founder of the Foster Care Excellence Foundation, philanthropist, champion of vulnerable children, describe her mission to protect the most fragile members of society. Every child deserves safety, Cordelia said, her voice carefully modulated to convey compassion. Every child deserves a home. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Federal investigators entered. Not uniformed agents. Suits. Professional, methodical, carrying folders marked with official seals. The forensic accountant stepped directly to the microphone and took it from Cordelia's hand. Cordelia Blackwood, you are the subject of an active federal investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy in child trafficking, the accountant said. Her voice was clear and cold. Multiple families have filed complaints alleging you received bribes for the placement of children in dangerous homes. Your foundation's finances are frozen as of this moment. The ballroom turned to stone. Cordelia's face drained of color. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound cutting through the silence like a gunshot. This is insane. I'm a philanthropist. I've given millions. You've diverted millions, the accountant interrupted. From foster care programs into personal accounts. The evidence is documented. She nodded to a technician who projected Cordelia's bank statements onto the ballroom screens. Transfers. Dates. Amounts that made gasps ripple through the crowd. Every major donation to your foundation between 2015 and 2023 has been traced. 70% was rerouted to shell companies you control. You have accepted bribes from families approved for adoptions. You have placed children with people you knew had criminal histories, and you covered it up. By 4 p.m., Cordelia had been removed from every board. Every charitable position. Every social committee that had formed her identity. By 6 p.m., lawsuits from 7 families had been filed. By 9 p.m., her assets were frozen. By the next morning, every news outlet in the state had run her photograph alongside the headline, "Philanthropist accused of child trafficking conspiracy." She would not go to prison immediately. The investigation would take months. But her life as she had known it was finished. Her reputation was ash. Her social standing had evaporated overnight. She had spent 2 decades building an empire of respectability, and it had taken one afternoon to dismantle it completely. Justice, Salvatore understood, was not always swift. But when it came, it could be thorough. That evening, Salvatore sat in his office on the 42nd floor of a building downtown. The windows framed the entire city, lights beginning to bloom as darkness fell. The television mounted on the wall showed the news coverage on loop. Douglas Hale's arrest. Cordelia Blackwood's exposure. 2 villains destroyed within 12 hours, their downfalls happening simultaneously across different parts of the city, different parts of society, but both orchestrated by a single man who had made 2 phone calls at dawn. Sergio and Nino stood near the desk. Both had known their boss for 15 years. Both had seen him do terrible things without flinching. But what they saw on his face now was unfamiliar territory. "You did this for a woman you met 3 days ago," Sergio said. Not a question. A statement of fact so unusual it required acknowledgement. Salvatore did not look away from the window. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man in a suit that cost more than most people's annual salary, hands folded on a desk that had witnessed 1,000 dark decisions. "She protected what mattered," Salvatore said quietly. "Despite having nothing to protect herself with. So I protected her." Nino exchanged a glance with Sergio. In 15 years of service, neither had ever heard him explain a decision. Salvatore Moreno did not justify. He acted. But this was different. "The custody hearing is in 4 days," Sergio said carefully. "She will win. The evidence is solid. The money is legitimate. Douglas Hale is facing federal charges. No court will deny her custody now." Salvatore nodded slowly. "She will win," he agreed. "But what she doesn't know yet is who Emma really is. That revelation will come after the hearing. After she has won. After she understands that I did not buy her victory. I only removed the obstacles she could not fight alone." Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic. Somewhere in the darkness, Allara Bennett sat in a hotel room, watching the news with tears streaming down her face, understanding finally that the world had shifted. That predators could fall. That invisible people could become visible. That sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment could change an entire life. The courthouse steps gleamed in the morning light, and Allara Bennett climbed them slowly, one hand gripping Emma's fingers, the other clutching a leather folder that contained everything she owned that mattered. Her suit was borrowed, grey wool from a Goodwill rack, hanging slightly loose because she had lost 12 pounds in the past month, and beneath the collar, fading bruises still mapped her throat like a geography of pain. Emma walked beside her in a yellow dress, her hair in careful braids that Allara had woven at 5 in the morning while her hands shook. The child was 7 years old and did not yet understand that this day would determine whether she stayed in Allara's arms or disappeared into the machinery of the state. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered. Allara stopped on the steps. She knelt down, looked directly into her daughter's eyes, eyes that were not legally her daughter's, not yet, but would be in minutes if the universe decided to be merciful for once. "Me too, baby. But we're doing this together. And nobody can take that away." Inside the courthouse, the hallway was cold and institutional. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like the sound of a machine deciding someone's fate. Ms. Chen, her lawyer, stood waiting in her navy suit and silver glasses. She was 54 years old and had been volunteering her time because Allara had no money for representation. Behind her stood a woman in professional attire who was not smiling. "This is Judge Hernandez's courtroom," Ms. Chen said quietly. "She's known for being fair. The evidence is solid. All of it." What Ms. Chen did not say aloud was that the evidence had materialized from nowhere. That federal agents had raided Douglas Hale's apartment at dawn. That Cordelia Blackwood's entire review board position had evaporated within 48 hours when financial crimes were discovered. That something massive and invisible had moved through the city like a shadow, clearing obstacles from Allara's path. What Allara did not know was that Salvatore Marino sat in a cafe 2 blocks away, receiving updates on his encrypted phone from Sergio, who sat in the courthouse gallery. That the predators who had tried to destroy her had been systematically dismantled. That the man she had protected with her own body was protecting her still. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Hernandez was a woman in her 60s with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that had seen every variation of human desperation. She reviewed the file for exactly 16 minutes. During that time, Allara's heart beat so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Emma drew pictures on a legal pad that Ms. Chen had provided. Simple drawings. A house. 2 stick figures. A sun. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Hernandez said finally, looking up from the paperwork. "I have reviewed the custody petition, the evidence regarding the biological father, the allegations against Ms. Blackwood, and the current circumstances." Allara could not breathe. The previous assessment was fundamentally flawed. The current evidence demonstrates not only your capacity to parent Emma, but your extraordinary commitment to her welfare despite significant personal hardship. Regarding Mr. Hale, he is currently facing federal charges unrelated to this proceeding, but they establish a pattern of behavior consistent with the allegations in your petition. Judge Hernandez adjusted her glasses. Custody is granted to Allara Bennett. Full and permanent. The court will issue the final order immediately. The words did not land right away. They floated above Allara's head like something written in a language she did not speak. Then Emma looked up from her drawing and said, "Mommy, you're crying." Allara was. Tears were running down her face, and her shoulders were shaking, and she could not make any sound at all. Ms. Chen squeezed her arm. The judge nodded slightly, a gesture that might have been compassion. They left the courtroom. The hallway was suddenly too bright, the fluorescent lights too loud, the very air too heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Outside, sitting on the courthouse steps in the afternoon sun, Allara pulled Emma into her lap and held her so tightly the child laughed and said, "Mommy, I can't breathe." "I know, baby. I'm sorry. I'm just so happy." 3 hours later, Salvatore Marino received a text message from Ms. Chen, "Custody granted. Full order. It is done." He set the phone down on his desk and stared out the window of his office, a space on the 42nd floor that looked out across the city he ruled. Behind him, Sergio entered without knocking. "The hearing?" Sergio asked. "She won." Sergio nodded. He had been expecting this. The machinery that Salvatore had set in motion, the federal agents, the financial audits, the evidence gathering, had been designed for exactly this outcome. But what remained unsaid was the thing that mattered most. Salvatore had not just protected Allara from destruction. He had begun the process of rebuilding her life from nothing. "What happens now?" Sergio asked carefully. Salvatore did not turn from the window. "Now," he said quietly, "I give her the freedom to choose." That evening, Allara and Emma moved into the hotel room that had been temporary shelter for 3 days. She unpacked their few possessions, Emma's drawings, her own worn shoes, the foreclosure notice that she still carried like a scar. She held that paper in her hands and understood, finally, that it no longer controlled her. She could burn it. She could throw it away. She could move forward. She did not yet know that Salvatore had already found her an apartment. That a job interview was scheduled for the following Monday. That he had dismantled the empire of predators surrounding her, and was now beginning the careful work of rebuilding her into someone who could stand alone. She only knew that she was no longer invisible. That her daughter was legally hers. That sometimes, inexplicably, a hand reached out in the darkness and changed everything. The next morning, a text arrived on her phone from a number she did not recognize. It was from Ms. Chen. A job listing. Property management company, $52,000 annual salary, health insurance, benefits. The interview was in 2 hours. Allara looked at Emma, still sleeping, peaceful in the hotel bed beside her. "We're doing it, baby," she whispered. "We're getting our life back." And somewhere in the city, Salvatore Marino sat in his office and waited for the next phase to unfold. The woman he had protected was finally free. Now came the harder part. Showing her that she could trust him not because he had saved her, but because he would never, ever let her fall again. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.